Sarah Thompson sat in her favorite armchair by the window, waiting for her daughter's monthly visit. The morning sun filled her small living room with warmth, but she couldn't shake off the worry that had been bothering her for weeks. Something wasn't right with Emma, her only daughter, and Sarah's motherly instincts were screaming at her. At exactly 11 a.m., Emma's blue car pulled into the driveway. Sarah watched as her daughter stepped out, and immediately noticed how different she looked from the bright, confident woman she had raised. Emma was wearing a long-sleeved shirt despite the hot summer weather, and her usual quick steps had been replaced by slow, careful movements. "Hi, Mom," Emma called out with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She carried a box of pastries from the local bakery, their Sunday tradition for the past 5 years, since Emma had married Mark and moved to the other side of town. Sarah hugged her daughter and felt Emma stiffen slightly. "Come in, sweetheart. I've made your favorite coffee." She guided Emma to the kitchen, watching closely as her daughter's sleeve rode up when she reached for the coffee cup. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. There, on Emma's wrist, were dark purple bruises in the shape of fingerprints. "Emma, what happened to your wrist?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice calm despite the storm brewing inside her. Emma quickly pulled down her sleeve. "Oh, it's nothing. I bumped into the door at work. You know how clumsy I can be." She laughed. The sound was hollow. Sarah remembered how graceful Emma had always been, even as a child. She had done ballet for 12 years and had never been clumsy a day in her life. The excuse rang false, but Sarah knew pushing too hard now would only make Emma retreat further. They sat at the kitchen table, sharing pastries and making small talk. Emma spoke about her job at the local library, and whenever Sarah mentioned Mark, Emma would change the subject. Sarah noticed other things too, how Emma kept checking her phone every few minutes, how she jumped at small noises, and how she had barely touched her food. "How are things with Mark?" Sarah finally asked directly, watching her daughter's reaction carefully. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "Everything's fine, Mom. He's just been stressed at work lately. The company's going through some changes." Sarah remembered the dinner last month when Mark had snapped at Emma for passing him the salt too slowly. At the time, Sarah had dismissed it as a bad day, but now every small incident from the past year started falling into place like pieces of a terrible puzzle. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Sarah said, reaching across the table to hold her daughter's hand. "Anything at all." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "I know, Mom. Everything's fine, really." She glanced at her phone again and stood up suddenly. "I should go. Mark's expecting me home for lunch." Sarah walked her daughter to the door, her mind racing. As Emma drove away, Sarah went straight to her study and pulled out a notebook. She wrote down everything she had noticed today, including the bruises, Emma's behavior, and her excuses. She may not have proof yet, but her mother's instinct told her Emma was in danger. Looking at the old family photos on her desk, Sarah's eyes fixed on one of Emma at her wedding. She had been so happy that day, her face glowing as she looked at Mark. How had things changed so much? Sarah picked up her phone and started searching for domestic violence hotline numbers. She wouldn't confront Mark directly. That could put Emma in more danger. No, she needed to be smart about this. As the sun set, Sarah made a promise to herself and to Emma. She would watch, document everything, and build a case. Most importantly, she would be there when Emma was. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah put her plan into action. She started by calling Emma every day, something she hadn't done since Emma first moved out. Each call gave her a chance to learn more about what was happening in her daughter's home. "Would you like to have lunch together tomorrow?" Sarah asked during one of these calls, keeping her voice casual. She had learned that Mark was most likely to be at work during lunch hours. I don't know, Mom," Emma hesitated. "I need to check with Mark first." Sarah's grip tightened on her phone. Before her marriage, Emma had never needed permission to have lunch with her own mother. "Of course, sweetie. Just let me know." The next day, Emma did come for lunch. Sarah had prepared her daughter's favorite sandwich and watched with concern as Emma picked at it without really eating. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she wasn't sleeping well. "I bought you some new clothes," Sarah said, pulling out a shopping bag. "I saw these and thought of you." Inside were several summer dresses and short-sleeved tops. Emma looked at the clothes with panic in her eyes. "They're beautiful, Mom, but I can't wear these right now. It's, it's too cold. It was the middle of July, and the temperature outside was over 85 degrees. Sarah took pictures when Emma wasn't looking. She captured the bruises on her daughter's arms when Emma reached for her water glass, the finger marks on her neck when she turned her head, and the way she winced when she sat down too quickly. One afternoon, while Emma was in the bathroom, Sarah quickly checked her daughter's phone. Her heart sank when she saw dozens of controlling text messages from Mark. "Where are you? Who are you with? Send me a picture to prove you're at your mom's. Come home now." Sarah also started talking to her neighbors, building a network of witnesses. Mrs. Peterson next door mentioned hearing screams from Emma at Mark's house last month when she was walking her dog. The teenage boy who delivered newspapers said he often saw Emma crying in her car before driving to work. Everything went into Sarah's notebook: times, dates, witnesses, photographs. She kept one copy at home and another in a safe deposit box at the bank. Her years working at the law firm had taught her the importance of backup evidence. One day, Sarah invited Emma's old friend Jenny for coffee. Jenny hadn't seen Emma in months, which was strange since they used to be inseparable. "Mark doesn't like me spending time with my old friends," Emma had told her mother. "He says they're a bad influence." Jenny shared more concerning information. "The last time I saw Emma, she was wearing sunglasses inside the grocery store. When I asked why, she said she had an eye infection, but I saw the bruise when she took them off to wipe her eyes." Sarah wrote it all down, her hand shaking with anger and fear. She also started putting away money in a separate account, knowing Emma might need it someday. Small amounts that wouldn't be noticed: $20 here, $50 there. She contacted Linda, a domestic violence advocate she knew from her time at the law firm. Linda helped her understand what Emma was going through and why she might be afraid to leave. "Leaving is the most dangerous time for victims," Linda explained. "We need to have a solid plan in place before anything happens." Sarah also learned about gathering evidence that would hold up in court. She bought a small voice recorder and showed Emma how to use it secretly on her phone. Every piece of evidence needed to be collected legally if they wanted to use it later. The hardest part was watching Emma leave after each visit, knowing she was going back to an abusive home. But Sarah knew she couldn't rush this. One wrong move could put Emma in even more danger. She had to be patient, gathering evidence and building a case that would be impossible to ignore. At night, Sarah would lie awake, planning her next steps. She thought about the bright, confident young woman her daughter used to be, and promised herself she would see that Emma again. No matter what it took, she would find a way to help her daughter escape. But first, she needed more proof. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday night. Sarah was getting ready for bed when she heard frantic knocking at her front door. Through the peephole, she saw Emma standing in the pouring rain, shaking and holding her arms around herself. Sarah quickly opened the door. "Emma, what happened?" She pulled her daughter inside, noticing immediately that Emma was wearing only a thin nightgown, soaked through from the rain. Her bare feet were muddy, suggesting she had run through the garden to escape. He? Emma couldn't finish her sentence. Her lip was split and bleeding, and a dark bruise was forming around her left eye. She collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Sarah's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had prepared for this moment. First, she needed to get Emma warm and safe. She wrapped her daughter in a thick blanket and guided her to the kitchen, where she made hot tea with shaking hands. "I'll kill him," Sarah whispered to herself, but she knew that wasn't the answer. She had a better plan, one that would destroy Mark without breaking any laws. As Emma sat at the kitchen table, trembling, Sarah quietly took photos of her injuries with her phone. She had learned from Linda that documentation was crucial, especially in the first moments after an incident. He was angry because dinner wasn't ready when he came home. Emma finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to explain that the power had gone out for 2 hours, but he wouldn't listen. He just started hitting me." She touched her split lip gently. "I've never seen him this angry before." Sarah sat next to her daughter and held her hand. "Emma, sweetheart, listen to me carefully. You don't have to go back there, ever." "But he'll find me." Emma's voice shook with fear. "He said if I ever tried to leave, He won't find you," Sarah said firmly. She went to her study and returned with a thick folder. I've been preparing for this. Look." She opened the folder and showed Emma everything she had collected over the past weeks. Photographs of previous injuries, witness statements from neighbors, screenshots of Mark's threatening texts, and a detailed log of every incident Emma had mentioned. "Mom, you did all this?" Emma looked at the evidence with wide eyes. "I also have this." Sarah pulled out a bank statement showing the separate account she had created. "There's enough money here for you to start over. And I've already talked to Linda at the women's shelter. They have a room ready for you whenever you need it." Fresh tears rolled down Emma's cheeks, but these were different from before. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I thought no one would believe me. Mark always said it was my fault, that I made him angry." "None of this is your fault," Sarah said firmly. "And we're going to prove it. Tomorrow morning, we're going to the police station. Linda will meet us there. We have enough evidence for a restraining order, and with these new injuries," she gently touched the bruise on Emma's face, "we can press criminal charges." Emma started shaking again. "What if they don't believe me?" "They will." Sarah's voice was strong and sure. "I've documented everything properly. Linda has already reviewed our evidence. Mark thinks he's so smart, but he didn't count on your mother being a former legal secretary who knows exactly how to build a case." For the first time that night, a tiny smile appeared on Emma's face. "You really thought of everything, didn't you?" "That's what mothers do." Sarah pulled her daughter into a gentle hug. "Now let's get you cleaned up and into some dry clothes. You can sleep in your old room tonight." As Emma showered, Sarah made two important calls. One to Linda to let her know what had happened, and another to her old friend at the law firm who had agreed to take Emma's case. Tomorrow would be hard, but they were ready. Mark's reign of terror was about to end, not with violence, but with justice. The next morning, Sarah woke up early and found Emma already sitting in the kitchen, staring at her untouched coffee. The bruise around her eye had darkened overnight, and her split lip was swollen. But there was something different about her today, a tiny spark of hope in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Your phone has been ringing all morning," Sarah said, noticing Emma's cell phone buzzing on the counter. Mark's name flashed on the screen for the 20th time. "He left 30 voice messages," Emma said quietly. "He says he's sorry, that it won't happen again. He always says that." Sarah sat down next to her daughter. "We're not going to answer him, but we are going to save every message and text. They're all evidence." She pulled out her notebook and started writing down the times of Mark's calls. At 9 a.m. sharp, Linda from the Domestic Violence Center arrived at their house. She was a kind-looking woman in her 50s who had helped hundreds of women escape abusive situations. Sarah had already told her everything on the phone last night. "Are you ready, Emma?" Linda asked gently. "We need to go to the hospital first for a medical examination. Then we'll go to the police station." Emma's hands started shaking. "What if Mark comes looking for me?" "He won't find you," Sarah assured her. "I called your workplace and told them you're taking emergency leave. I also called Mark's office and learned he's in meetings all morning. We have time." The hospital visit was hard. The doctor documented every bruise, every mark on Emma's body. She took pictures and wrote detailed notes. Sarah held her daughter's hand through it all, fighting back tears as she saw the full extent of Mark's abuse. "The medical report will be crucial evidence," Linda explained as they left the hospital. "Now, let's go to the police station." At the station, they met with Detective Garcia, a female officer who specialized in domestic violence cases. She listened carefully as Emma told her story, with Sarah and Linda providing the supporting evidence they had gathered. "You've done everything right?" Detective Garcia said, looking through Sarah's carefully organized folder. "Most victims don't have this much documentation. This will make our job much easier." While Emma gave her official statement, Sarah and Linda worked on the restraining order paperwork. They included every incident Sarah had documented, every photograph, every witness statement. Sarah's years of legal experience helped her know exactly what details would make the strongest case. "We need to move quickly," Linda said. "Once Mark realizes Emma isn't coming back, he might become more dangerous." "I thought of that too," Sarah replied. She pulled out another folder. "These are the security cameras I bought. They'll be installed at my house this afternoon. I also hired a private security service to patrol our street." Detective Garcia joined them with good news. Based on Emma's statement and the evidence, they had enough to arrest Mark. Officers were being dispatched to his workplace right now. But that's not all, the detective added. We found 2 other women who had filed complaints against Mark in the past. They're willing to testify. Emma, who had been quiet for most of the morning, suddenly spoke up. There are others. Abusers often have a history, Linda explained gently. That's why documenting everything is so important. You're not just helping your own case, you're helping other women too. Sarah watched as her daughter straightened her shoulders, sitting up taller. Something was changing in Emma. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by something stronger, determination. They spent the rest of the morning finalizing paperwork. Sarah made sure every form was filled out perfectly, every box checked, every signature in place. She knew from her legal experience that even small mistakes could cause delays, and they couldn't afford any delays. By afternoon, they had a temporary restraining order in place. Mark would be served with the papers as soon as he was released from police custody. The wheels of justice were finally turning, and Sarah's careful planning was paying off. The news of Mark's arrest spread quickly through their small town. Sarah and Emma were having lunch at home when Emma's phone started buzzing with messages from friends and coworkers. Mark's perfect image as a successful businessman was crumbling, and people were finally seeing the truth. Did you see the local news website? Linda called to tell them. They're running a story about Mark's arrest. 2 more women have come forward with similar stories of abuse. Sarah watched her daughter closely as she processed this information. Emma sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through messages on her phone. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Mom, Emma said suddenly, I want to tell my story. If other women are brave enough to speak up, I should too. Sarah felt a surge of pride. This was the daughter she remembered, strong, determined, unwilling to let fear control her. Are you sure? You don't have to do this if you're not ready. I'm sure, Emma replied, but I need your help. Over the next few days, they worked with Linda to prepare Emma's statement. Sarah used her legal knowledge to make sure everything was worded correctly. They decided to release it through the Domestic Violence Center's official channels, where it would have the most impact. Meanwhile, Mark's lawyer had been calling repeatedly. He offered a deal. If Emma dropped the charges, Mark would agree to a quick, generous divorce settlement. Sarah knew this tactic well from her years at the law firm. He's trying to buy your silence, Sarah explained to Emma. He knows his reputation is at stake, but money won't fix what he did. Emma didn't even consider the offer. I want him to face consequences, she said firmly. Not just for me, but for the other women too. Their preparation paid off when Mark's lawyer filed a motion claiming Emma's injuries were self-inflicted. Sarah pulled out her detailed documentation, photographs spanning months, witness statements, medical records, and the voice recordings Emma had managed to capture on her phone. The lawyer's motion was quickly dismissed. Your mother's evidence is extraordinary, Detective Garcia told Emma during a follow-up interview. Most cases aren't this well documented. We're using it as an example to help other victims understand what kind of evidence they should collect. Sarah had also been busy securing Emma's future. She helped her daughter find a therapist who specialized in domestic abuse trauma. Together, they went to Emma and Mark's house with a police escort to collect her personal belongings. Sarah documented everything they took with photographs and lists, knowing Mark might try to accuse them of theft. One evening, as they sat in Sarah's living room looking through old family albums, Emma found a picture of herself from her wedding day. I was so happy then, she said softly. I really thought he loved me. Sarah put her arm around her daughter. He fooled everyone, sweetheart. But you're stronger than he ever expected. You're proving that right now. The next day, they received news that the district attorney was moving forward with criminal charges against Mark. The evidence was too strong to ignore, and with multiple victims coming forward, Mark was facing serious prison time. There's something else, Linda told them during her visit. Your story has inspired other women to seek help. The domestic violence hotline has received twice as many calls this week. Women are asking for advice about documenting abuse, just like you did. Sarah watched as Emma's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of pride. Her daughter was turning her pain into purpose, her fear into strength. You know what surprises me most? Emma said that evening as they sat on Sarah's porch. Everyone keeps talking about how brave I am, but I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mom. You believed me before I was ready to believe myself. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. Her careful planning had worked better than she'd hoped, not just in building a legal case, but in helping Emma find her strength again. The road ahead would still be challenging, but they would face it together. The courthouse was packed on the morning of Mark's preliminary hearing. Sarah sat in the front row, holding Emma's hand tightly. They watched as Mark entered the courtroom in handcuffs, looking nothing like the confident businessman he once was. His expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his posture. "Are you okay?" Sarah whispered to Emma, who had tensed up at the sight of her husband. Emma nodded, her face determined. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." Their lawyer, Patricia Martinez, whom Sarah knew from her days at the law firm, stood up with a thick folder of evidence. She began presenting their case, and Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction as she recognized the documents, photographs, and recordings she had so carefully collected. "Your Honor," Patricia began, "I would like to present evidence of a systematic pattern of abuse." She started with the earliest photographs Sarah had taken, showing Emma's bruises from months ago. Then came the witness statements from neighbors, the medical reports, and the threatening text messages. Mark's lawyer tried to object, claiming some of the evidence was obtained without his client's knowledge. But Sarah had made sure everything was collected legally. The judge overruled each objection. The most powerful moment came when they played the audio recordings. Emma's voice, small and frightened, could be heard begging Mark to stop. His angry shouts and the sound of breaking glass filled the courtroom. Sarah saw several jury members flinch. During a break in the proceedings, Detective Garcia approached them with news. "2 more victims have come forward after seeing the news coverage," she told them quietly. "They're willing to testify about similar abuse they suffered when they dated Mark in college." Sarah watched as Mark's confident facade crumbled further when his lawyer whispered this news to him. He kept looking back at Emma, perhaps hoping to intimidate her, but Emma stayed strong, her head held high. "The defendant has a choice to make," Patricia told Mark's lawyer during the recess. "He can either accept a plea deal that includes jail time and mandatory counseling, or we can proceed with a full trial where all 5 victims will testify." Sarah had helped prepare the impact statements from each victim. She had worked with Linda to ensure their stories were properly documented, just as she had done with Emma's. The evidence was overwhelming. Back in the courtroom, Mark's lawyer requested a brief consultation with his client. Sarah could see them arguing in whispers. Mark's face had turned red with anger, but for once, he wasn't in control. "Your Honor," Mark's lawyer finally spoke, "my client would like to discuss the terms of a plea agreement." The judge called both legal teams to approach the bench. Sarah squeezed Emma's hand as they waited. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, Patricia returned with a smile. "He's accepting the plea deal," she told them quietly. 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. You'll have to attend mandatory counseling and anger management classes. There will be a lifetime restraining order, and you'll have to pay significant restitution to all his victims. Emma started crying softly, but these were tears of relief. "It's really over." "Almost," Sarah replied. "We still have the divorce proceedings, but with this conviction, it will be straightforward. I've already prepared all the necessary documentation." As they watched Mark being led away in handcuffs, Sarah noticed something remarkable about her daughter. Emma was standing tall, her shoulders straight, looking more like her old self than she had in years. The fearful, shrinking woman of the past months was gone. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting with cameras and microphones. Linda had prepared them for this moment, helping Emma craft a statement that would encourage other abuse victims to seek help. "You don't have to speak to them if you don't want to," Sarah reminded her daughter. But Emma was ready. "I want to," she said firmly. "Maybe someone will hear my story and realize they don't have to live in fear either." 3 months after Mark's sentencing, Sarah sat in the audience at the local community center, watching proudly as Emma stood at the podium. The room was filled with women who had come to hear her daughter speak about her experience and learn how to protect themselves from domestic abuse. "I wouldn't be standing here today if it wasn't for my mother," Emma began, her voice clear and strong. "She taught me that the best weapon against abuse isn't violence or revenge, it's knowledge and preparation." Sarah remembered how different Emma had looked just a few months ago, afraid of her own shadow. Now her daughter was helping other women find their strength, just as Sarah had helped her. After the Domestic Violence Center shared Emma's story, many women had reached out for help. Some were inspired by how Sarah had documented the abuse, while others were moved by Emma's courage to speak up. The center had asked Emma to become a regular speaker at their events. My mother showed me how to gather evidence properly, Emma continued, holding up a folder similar to the one Sarah had created. Today, I'm going to teach you the same techniques. These might save your life or help you save someone else's. Sarah watched as Emma explained the importance of keeping detailed records, taking photographs, and saving text messages. She showed the women how to use their phones to secretly record abuse, just as Sarah had taught her. The audience took notes eagerly, many of them wiping away tears. Linda, who was sitting next to Sarah, leaned over and whispered, "Your daughter is amazing. We've seen a 50% increase in women seeking help since she started sharing her story." During the break, several women approached Sarah to thank her. One older woman was crying as she spoke. "I wish I had known these things when my daughter was alive. Maybe I could have saved her." Sarah hugged the woman tightly. "You can help save others now," she said softly. "That's what Emma and I are trying to do." The success of Emma's presentations led to invitations from other organizations. She spoke at police training sessions, teaching officers how to help victims document abuse. She visited law firms, showing lawyers how to build stronger cases for their clients. Each time she spoke, Sarah saw her daughter grow stronger. Emma's personal life was changing too. She had moved into a new apartment, started taking art classes again, something Mark had forbidden, and was slowly learning to trust people. Sarah noticed how her daughter laughed more easily now, how she no longer jumped at sudden noises. "I'm thinking of going back to school," Emma told her mother one evening as they sat in Sarah's garden. "I want to become a victim's advocate like Linda, maybe even study law." Sarah smiled, remembering how Mark had discouraged Emma's dreams of further education. "You'd be wonderful at that," she said. "You've already helped so many women." That night, after Emma left, Sarah found a note her daughter had left on the kitchen table. "Dear Mom, today at the community center, I realized something. When you first noticed my bruises, you could have just gotten angry or confronted Mark. Instead, you used your knowledge to help me escape safely. You taught me that true strength isn't about fighting back with fists, but about fighting smart with evidence and the law. Because of you, I'm not just a survivor, I'm helping others survive too. Thank you for saving my life. Love, Emma." Sarah held the note close to her heart, tears rolling down her cheeks. She thought about all the women who were still trapped in abusive relationships, afraid and alone. But now, thanks to Emma's courage in sharing her story, more mothers would know what to look for. More women would know how to gather evidence. More lives would be saved. She pinned Emma's note to her refrigerator, right next to the flyer for next week's presentation at the women's shelter. The title read, "Smart Documentation, A Mother and Daughter's Guide to Escaping Abuse." Sarah smiled, knowing that their painful experience was now helping others find their way to freedom. 1 year had passed since the day Sarah first noticed the bruises on Emma's wrists, so much had changed in that time. Sarah sat in her living room, surrounded by newspaper clippings about their story and letters from women they had helped. The doorbell rang, and Sarah opened it to find Emma standing there with a bright smile and a folder tucked under her arm. Her daughter looked healthy and strong, nothing like the frightened woman she had been a year ago. "Mom, you won't believe this." Emma rushed in excitedly. "The state legislature wants me to testify about our documentation method. They're considering making it part of the standard police training program." Sarah felt pride swell in her chest. What had started as a mother's desperate attempt to save her daughter had grown into something much bigger. Their method of gathering evidence was now known as the Thompson Documentation System among local law enforcement. Linda sent over the latest numbers. Emma continued, pulling papers from her folder. "In the past year, 53 women in our county alone have successfully left abusive situations using our documentation techniques. And those are just the ones we know about." They sat down at the kitchen table, where they had spent so many worried hours a year ago. Now it was covered with materials for their upcoming workshop. Sarah and Emma had started teaching monthly classes together, showing mothers how to spot signs of abuse and helping victims build their cases. "Remember what you told me that first night?" Emma asked, reaching for her mother's hand. "You said we would fight smart, not angry. You were right." Sarah remembered clearly. I wanted to hurt Mark for what he did to you. But this way, we've helped so many more people. The afternoon mail arrived, bringing more letters from women they had helped. One was from a mother in another state who had read about their story online. She had noticed bruises on her own daughter and used their methods to document the abuse. Now her daughter was safe too. Oh, and guess what else? Emma pulled out her phone to show Sarah an email. The Domestic Violence Center offered me a full-time position as their training coordinator. They want me to develop a comprehensive documentation program for other centers across the country. Sarah smiled, remembering how Mark had always told Emma she wasn't smart enough for a career. Now her daughter was becoming a recognized expert in her field, helping to change laws and save lives. They heard a car pull up outside. It was Linda arriving for their weekly planning meeting. They were organizing a conference for mothers of abuse victims, teaching them how to support their daughters and collect evidence properly. Before Linda comes in, Emma said quickly, I wanted to show you something else. She pulled out a law school application. I've been accepted for the fall semester. I'm going to become a family law attorney, Mom. I want to help other women fight their battles in court. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, tears in her eyes. You've come so far, she whispered. Linda knocked on the door just as they were wiping their eyes. She came in carrying more success stories. 3 more women had won their court cases this week using the Thompson documentation system. As they sat planning their next workshop, Sarah looked around her kitchen. The same room where she had first started documenting Emma's abuse was now a place of hope and healing. Her careful notes had become a lifeline for other victims, her methods a tool for justice. The sun was setting outside, casting a warm glow through the windows. On Sarah's refrigerator, next to Emma's law school acceptance letter, hung a quote they had chosen for their workshops. A mother's love doesn't just protect, it empowers. Emma caught her mother looking at the quote and smiled. You know what, Mom? Mark thought he was powerful because he could hit me. But you showed me what real power is. It's helping others, changing lives, making a difference. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. Their story hadn't ended with Mark's arrest or the divorce. Instead, it had become a beginning. The start of a movement that was helping mothers and daughters everywhere transform from victims into survivors, from survivors into advocates, and from advocates into champions of change.